You know, we normally say that it's the ones that come out are God's saints, and the ones that stay home, those are Pastor Patch's saints. It's good to see so many of God's saints out tonight. So we are going to talk about something that I've been looking at, been studying, and it deals with the feasts of the Lord and how they correspond with the days of creation. There's also a correlation between our salvation, but I'm not going to touch on that tonight. I need to do a little bit more studying on that. I'll touch a little bit on certain parts of that, but there's a correlation between that too. And so when you look at the way this is all put together, you see the creative genius of how God is and how you're dealing with the Almighty and how He has taken something and spread it out over so many years through so many different people and made it all fit together. Okay. The Bible was written by 40 people over 2,000 years. 40 different people, 2,000 years. And that's how long it took to write the Bible. There's been different books, and they've all been put together into one book. And this book, in chapter 5 of Genesis, it tells us that this book, verse 1 says, this is the book of the generations of Adam, and the day that God created man. In the likeness of God made He him, male and female, created He them, and blessed them and called their name Adam. And that's something to look at right there. God is calling male and female Adam. He called both of them Adam. Verse 2 says, male and female created He them and blessed them and called their name Adam. So a lot of times when you hear them say man, they're talking about mankind. In this case, you hear God saying Adam. Either He's referring to male and female. So when you go to Genesis, but before we go to Genesis, in Matthew chapter 4, it says, but He answered and said, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. The Bible is the words of God written down on paper, or in this case on the computer. He wrote it down for us. And every single word is important. If it wasn't important, it wouldn't be in there. He even says in one scripture that in Matthew 5:18, for verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall not in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled. Now one jot, if you don't know what that is, that's a period. And a tittle is a little cross on a T. Everything's important. Every single thing that's in the Bible, from every line to every dot, everything is in there for a purpose. Yes, even the periods. And He's saying you have to pay attention to every single thing that's written in the Bible. It's vital. Now, you have to understand also that the Bible is not a novel. Even though it is the best-selling book of all time, it's not a novel. So you can't read it from cover to cover like you do a book. If you do it like that, you'll miss a whole lot of stuff that's going on. Let's go to one of the most important passages that are in the Bible. It's in Isaiah 28. Isaiah chapter 28. How many people are parents? Raise your hand if you're a parent. Now, how many people are kids? That would be everybody.
Everybody.
One thing for sure, as a parent, you have done this, and as a kid, you've heard this. Anytime that you want your kid to know something's important, you tell it to them multiple times. And then you remind them, didn't I tell you, when they do something wrong. You tell them over and over again when it's extremely important. As a kid, you've heard your parents harp on something and you think, my God, I got it. But they keep telling me. Well, there's a reason why they keep telling you. Because it's highly important. In Isaiah chapter 28, verse 10, it says, for precept must be upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little and there a little. And if you skip down to verse 13, it says, but the word of the Lord was unto them precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little and there a little, that they might go and fall backward and be broken and snared and taken. He's telling you, there's going to be a little bit here, and there's going to be a little bit there. But if you piece them together right, it makes total sense. And he's telling you this, and this is why this is so important. He says it over and over and over again in one little small time frame. There's times where he says in the New Testament, verily I say unto you. And then there's times that he'll say, verily, verily, I say unto you. It's like, well, you need to really pay attention to this. Well, this one, he says it over and over and over again in a very small time frame. I mean, a very small passage that you need to really pay attention to everything, and it's going to all fit together, line upon line and precept upon precept. So when you study the Bible, understand that it's certain things you can read straight through, certain things you have to piece together. So tonight we're going to be piecing some things together, and we're going to be making something that's going to be really nice. Now, how many people enjoy taking notes with electronic devices? How many people enjoy taking notes with non-electronic devices? Pen, pencil, whatever it is. Sister Cherise, you raise your hand. Why do you prefer pen and paper?
Because I remember when I'm writing it down and saying it as I'm writing it, I can retain it better.
You retain it better. Who else had their hand up? Keith.
Because it's more accessible.
It's more accessible.
I'm just so passionate. It's like reading paperback book versus Kindle. It's kind of old-fashioned with it.
Kind of like it. So who likes the computer? Why do you like the computer? Sure, you. Okay, that's the way you take notes. Play games. Why do you like computers more than paper?
Because it's my generation. So the millennials, that's just what it is. The computers and phones for everything.
Okay. And Nicoletta? Spell check.
That's a good one.
Everybody has their preference on how they do it. But the whole thing is that it is one thing, whether it's through pen and paper or whether it's through computer. When you write down with your pen and paper or when you write down with your computer, is the computer writing it or are you writing it? Is the pen writing it or are you writing it? You're writing it. And so that's exactly what the Bible is. The Bible is where God spoke through men and they wrote down what he was saying. So what you're actually looking at is the words that God has spoken. This is not something that Moses is the one that came up with this. No, this is what God spoke to Moses, and he was the pen. And God used him to write the Bible. So Moses, and you see a lot of other people, Joshua, and Matthew, and John, and you'll see a whole lot of people that are pens, that are computers. It's all the same. It's all a way that was used to put down what it was. So if we go to Leviticus chapter 23, we're going to start looking at some of these things that are feasts. Leviticus 23 and 1. And when you have it, say amen. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them concerning the feast of the Lord, which ye shall proclaim to be a holy convocation. Even these are my feasts. 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of rest. So now, in this, God is actually telling us something dealing with the days of creation. The days of creation, you work 6 days. That's what God did. God created for 6 days, and on the final day, He rested. This is something that's written in the book of Leviticus, but it's really talking about something that's going on in Genesis. So now we're going to study between these two things that are going to be going on. The first thing we need to know is, what is a day? A day could be like a dozen. What's a dozen? 12. It's just 12. A day, somebody thinks of, but it's really a period of 1. What's a week? 7 periods. So when you're looking at a day in the Bible, a day can be more than 24 hours. There's a scripture in the Bible that says that a day with the Lord is as 1,000 and 1,000 as a day. In this case, a day is 7,000 years. When you're talking about creation, 1 day is 7,000 years. That scripture was 2 Peter 3 and 8. But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that 1 day with the Lord is as 1,000, and it's 1,000 years as 1 day. We can actually confirm through math 7,000 years. Because right now, we're in day 6 of creation. We're in day 6. And everything that God does is uniform. So if day 6 is 7,000 years, then so will day 1, day 2, and so on and so forth. We know there's 4,000 years from Adam to Christ. We know that there's going to be 2,000 years from Christ to the millennial reign. And then the millennial reign is going to be 1,000 years, and then that is 7,000. Yes?
So are we looking at each dispensation as a day?
Each dispensation is not a day. Because there's 7 dispensations in day 6. All the dispensations are in day 6. So that would be innocence, conscience, human government, all of those. That's all happening in day 6.
And we are in day 6.
You're in day 6? We'll get to that. We'll get to that. So Genesis 1 and 1, everybody knows what Genesis 1 and 1 says. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But let's really look at that for a minute. It says, in the beginning, God created. So I was talking with Sister Katika today. And if anybody was here Sunday, they remember that she was talking about this thing that she was in. It was a room, an escape room. And this escape room did something to her. It inspired her. And she says, you know what I want to do? I want to create one. And so the first place that she did create this room, right here. So when you see God saying, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, it's all being created, okay? It's not being made yet. So when He said He created it, nothing's done yet. It's like an overview. Okay, I'm thinking, okay, this is what I'm going to do for my escape room. I'm going to do this. And you're going through and you got everything planned. That's why He was the Lamb slain even before the foundation of the world. It was all done. Everything from the beginning to the end. And remember, beginning to end. That's time. If we were to have, let's just say, this up here. You look at that wonderful sign up there, right? And if we look at the word hope, there's an E. And in the E, you see a little line. Imagine that's time. Okay? That's from the beginning of time till the end of time. Keep that in mind. God is everything around it. God is also the line. So that means that God is at the beginning of time, and He's also at the end of time at the same time. And He's also in time. So that way He can say, yes, I've been here. He's the only one that can speak about the future as the past. Because He's already there. The future for us is going to be future tense. The past is past tense. But with God, when God says something, He speaks of it all any way He wants, because He's in the future, He's in the past, and He's in the present right now. When Jesus was talking to some of the men, He said, before Abraham was, He didn't say I was. He said I am. That's present. That was Jesus talking. So before Abraham was, I am. So He's speaking present tense. I love it. So it says in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. Now we're going to skip down to verse 3. It says, through faith, in Hebrews 11:3, it says, through faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made by things that do appear. In other words, God created something out of nothing. Now Sister Katika is going to create something out of something. And there's no way anybody in this world can make anything out of nothing. Even if they have a new idea, they have to make something from something. God is the only one that can take something and make it out of nothing. If we go to Genesis 1 and 3, we'll start there. When you have it, say amen. It says, and God said, let there be light. And there was light. Now, some people may think light as in illumination. That doesn't happen until later. So what is he talking about here when he says, let there be light? Let's look at St. John 1. St. John chapter 1. We're going to be doing some bouncing back and forth because we're going line upon line and precept upon precept. We're going to be looking at different things throughout the Bible. It's all over, but it all comes right together. St. John 1 and 1. It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. Here's the key verse right here. In Him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in darkness, and darkness comprehendeth it not. Back in Genesis, it says, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light, and God saw the light, and that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness night. We are children of the day. When He made light, He made life. He brought in all the building blocks that are going to be needed. Because remember, there's nothing. So He brought in electrons, protons, neutrons, hydrogen, nitrogen, all these different gases and all these different things. He's bringing them all together. And it takes 7,000 years for him to put all of this stuff together. And he created all of these building blocks so that we can have life. Now, the very first feast in Leviticus chapter 23 is the Feast of Passover. The Passover feast is about when the children of Israel were in Egypt. And when the children of Israel were in Egypt, they had all these different plagues. You see, they were slaves. They were trying to get out of the slavery. Moses came back to get them out of there, and there was all these different plagues that went on. You had the blood that was, the water was turned to blood. There was frogs, there was flies, there was gnats, there was boils, there was hail, there was locusts. There was all kinds of these plagues that went on, and the last one that happened was the death angel that was coming through, and if you did not have blood applied to your doorpost, he was going to come in there and kill your firstborn. At that point, God was separating the children of light and the children of darkness. The children of light, or the children of God, in this case the children of Israel, put the blood, applied it, and that is considered Passover because the death angel passed over them. How does that correlate to day one? Because there is a separation between light and darkness. The children of light were separated from the children of darkness. And so that's how there is a correlation between Passover and day one. Day two. And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. This is verse 6, now verse 7. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which was under the firmament, and the waters which was above the firmament, and it was so. God called the firmament heaven, and even in the morning, the second day. So now all of this gas, protons, neutrons, electrons, and things, they begin to cool, and they shrink. They start to form water. Like, think about it this way. We're breathing water right now. Right now we're breathing water. It's called humidity. Might be low. But what happens when it continues to condense? Have you ever been outside on a real humid day and you can see it? Mm-hmm. How about when it condenses even more? It's called steam. When it condenses even more, it turns into droplets of water, and then it becomes pools of water. It just begins to shrink and shrink and shrink more. Let's go to Leviticus, the second feast. Let's go to Leviticus chapter 23, verse 6. Do we have any bakers in the house? I know I am. Anybody else bake anything? Yes. A cake or two? Leviticus 23:6 says, and on the 5th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread unto the Lord. 7 days must ye eat unleavened bread. Unleavened bread is bread without yeast. You need yeast in order to have rise. If you don't have it, it'll shrink. So now here, this is day 2, and we're talking about the feast of unleavened bread. Unleavened is without yeast. Leaven is yeast. So this bread that they're making is unleavened bread. No yeast. So when the bread is made, it shrinks. Just like day 2. Day 2, everything shrank and it began to condense. Then you've seen a division happen between the waters and the heavens. Everybody follow me so far? Amen. I heard one amen.
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 All right, because It's going to be going back and forth for a minute here. Because there's another thing that I'm trying to think whether I should talk about it or not, because it's pretty good. I don't know. Let's see. Well, let's talk about it real quick. It's pretty good. All right, so remember, what day was water made? Right? Read Genesis 1 and 2.
I can't smell.
And you have it? Read. Genesis 1 and 2. Read.
That's 1:7. Keep scrolling up, too.
Alright, we'll wait.
It always brings me all the way to where
Goes to the
Without
last
form and
word.
void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters.
How's that possible? That was before day 1, according to this. Because the chapter, verse 3 says, and God said, let there be light. How's that possible?
It's the living water.
I don't think so.
You know, trying to throw it out there, you know. He is the true and living water. Yeah. Sounds good, though.
Jeremiah,
No.
chapter 4. Line upon line. We're going to bounce a little bit back and forth. Jeremiah chapter 4. That's what I love about this. Chapter 4, verse 24. Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 24. And when you have it, say amen.
Amen.
Chapter 4, verse 24 says, and I beheld the mountains, and lo, they trembled, and all of the hills moved lightly, and behold, there was no man in the... Whoa, I went too far. I'm sorry. Let me make sure I got that right. Let me go to Jeremiah over here. Yeah.
That's 23.
23. I'm sorry. 23. It says, and I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void. Sound familiar? It says, and there was no light. That's true too. This sounds just like Genesis 1 and 2. It says, and I beheld the mountains, and lo, they trembled, and all the hills moved lightly. And I beheld, and lo, there was no man. Man wasn't made until day 6. Right?
Is that when the 5 eyes happened?
The what?
5 eyes. I would be like the Most High. I would be boldly kicked out.
Not yet. Like, it's kind of yes. Yes. We're getting there. So we know that there was no man, so it was before day 6. We know that because there's no men. And all the birds of heaven fled. So we know there's birds. And I beheld, and lo, the fruitful place was wilderness. So we know that there had to have been some sort of fruitful place. That was day 3. It was made wilderness. Now this is where it gets somewhere. It says, and the cities were broken down at the presence of the Lord and his fierce anger. There had to be something inhabiting the cities. But it was before men. It is said that this is speaking of angels. This is actually talking about what happened after Satan was cast out of heaven and cast to the ground. Later on it says, and I think it's Luke, he says, didn't I see you fall as lightning? So verse 2 is actually something that happens right between day 5 and day 6. When Satan hits the ground and he just destroys everything. And it says that it was without form and void, meaning it was no longer in the same form that was in, not shape, but form. In other words, the things were destroyed by Satan. And ever since Satan's been here, he's had one thing that he's done very well: destruction. Sister, listen. He's destroyed and destroyed and destroyed. And one of the first things that he destroyed after that was Adam. We're going to get to that. Where was we at? Day 3. So yeah, that's kind of I like that. Okay, so day 3 starts in verse 9, and it says, "And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together in one place, under one place, and let the dry land appear, and it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said," watch this, "let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself, upon the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and the herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good." That's day 3. So he made grass, and he made fruit, and he made these things to grow. He made vegetation. Now back over in Leviticus chapter 23 verse 10, it talks about the next feast. Now this is the 3rd feast. The 3rd feast is the feast of first fruits. See how they're blended? This is the feast of first fruits. And it's talking about, speaking to the children of Israel, and say unto them, "When ye be come into the land which I give unto you, and shall reap the harvest thereof, then ye shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest unto the priest. And he shall wave the sheaf before the Lord to be accepted for you on the morrow, after the Sabbath of the priest shall ye wave it." So now we're talking about a wave offering of first fruits. And this is the same thing that's going on in day 3. Is we have all of these things that are now being planted, and they're growing, and the wind's blowing, and they're waving, and they're giving God praise, and they're doing all of this stuff as they're doing an offering. It's the same thing that happened in the book of Leviticus. They're blended. And so God's got this plan together. It's just awesome. And how he's making everything piece together. Line upon line. Precept upon precept. It's awesome. So now they're blending together the feasts and the days of creation. Day 4, we're going back to Genesis. Because I'm going to have you bounce between Genesis and Leviticus. Because these are the 2 things that they're going to be blending together. Day 4 is the day that they have for, let me see. Day 4 is, in Leviticus, the Feast of Pentecost. Pentecost means 50. That's what Pentecost means. So in this case, it says in verse 15, in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 15, "And ye shall count unto you for the morrow after the Sabbath, from the day that ye brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths." A Sabbath is 7. So 7 Sabbaths is how many?
7 weeks.
Which is how many days? 49. There's 49. And then it says, "And ye shall count unto you from the morrow." That's the next day. That's 50. 49 plus 1 is 50. 50 is Pentecost. Most of us know that from Acts chapter 2. And it says, "And when the day of Pentecost was fully come." It's pretty familiar scripture. But what it's talking about when it says the day of Pentecost is fully come, they're talking about the Feast of Pentecost. They're talking about 50 days from, there it is. Why do you think there were so many people there on the day of Pentecost? They were there in the city for the feast of Pentecost. And that's why when the 120 was up there having a good old time, there was a lot of people around, and they was from all over. That's because they were coming to Jerusalem for the Feast of Pentecost. The Feast of Pentecost is the day that we received our illumination. That's when we were illuminated by God. Now let's go back to Genesis chapter 1. And we're looking at day 4. Second day. Hope I'm not going too fast. Third day. Okay. Not going too fast, Alan. Okay. So, the 14th verse. It says, and God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night. And let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. This is natural light. The first light that was made was life. That was Christ. That was God on day 1. Now it's natural light. This is the illuminating light. This is us. Because it is natural. We are the natural. Christ is the spiritual. So when that first one was made, it was the spiritual. Now we're the reflection of Him. We're a light. And we're a light to men. It says that we, let me see, verse 16, I got to see right, verse 17, and God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light upon the earth. That's what we do. We are the light of the world. We are the light of the earth. From Pentecost, that's us. That's when we received our light. And so, our job is to rule over the day and over the night and divide the light from the darkness. When we're going out and we're preaching the gospel, we're actually dividing. And the Bible even talks about it's going to be this one against this one against this one. That's because of the light that we're carrying with us. We're going to cause division. That's what we do. We're not doing it because we're trying to cause strife. We're doing it because we're a child of the light. Amen? Amen. Y'all following this? This is kind of like this stuff. Okay, day 5. Day 5 in Leviticus is the Feast of Trumpets. Leviticus 23 and 24 says, speak unto the children of Israel, and saying, in the 7th month, in the first day of the month, shall ye have a Sabbath, a memorial of blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. So, a memorial of blowing trumpets. So they're memorializing something by the trumpets being blown, which is sound. When you go back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 23. 24. And God said, let the earth bring forth the living creatures, cattle, creeping things. All these things that they're making are things that make sound. So everything that's made on that day are things that deal with sound. Just like the Feast of the Trumpets, which is sound. Each one of these things are lining right up to all of these different feasts of the Lord and how they're coinciding with the days of creation. And they also coincide with, like I said, with salvation. One of the little tidbits was Pentecost. That's us. Well, that's the Feast of Pentecost, but it's also the day of Pentecost. Like I said, I'll just touch on just a couple of those, but the main thing is that we're going to talk about the feast. Now, between 5 and 6, that's where Satan falls and just cuts up and tears stuff up. And Ezekiel, you don't have to turn to this, Ezekiel 28, starting in verse 13, this is where they're talking about Satan's beauty. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering, the sardius, the topaz, the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, and the jasper, the sapphire, the emerald, and the carbuncle, and the gold. The workmanship of thy tabrets and of thy pipes was prepared in thee in the day that thou wast created. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down the midst of the stones of fire. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created, till iniquity was found in thee. And then in Isaiah chapter 14, in verse 12, it says, How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thy heart, now this is what Lita was talking about. Sister Lita was saying the 5 eyes. I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of configuration in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Sin had hit him hard. And so that's why he fell as lightning. So God caused that to happen, and he fell right in between day 5 and day 6. Caused a big mess. So now day 6 is here. And remember, each one of these days is how many years? 7,000. 7,000 years for each day. And somebody might think, well, why does it take God 7,000 years to do something? Can't he just snap his fingers and he's got fingers? Well, let me ask you this. He's made man, and is man perfect yet?
No.
No. We're still being worked on. This is day 6. And we're still being worked on. And we still got over 1,000 years to go. Over 1,000 years. But that doesn't mean that we have 1,000 years. So he's still working on that. So it took him 7,000 years for each day. Day 6 was the creation of man. Now in Leviticus 27, this was the Feast of Atonement. Also it says in verse 27, it says, Also of the 10th day of the 7th month, there shall be a day of atonement. It shall be a holy convocation unto you, and you shall afflict your souls, and offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord. And ye shall do no work in the same day, for it is a day of atonement, to make atonement for you before the Lord your God. When God created man, and he made him in the 6th day, this is talking about what happened because of the sin that happened because of Satan. There has to be an atonement. And that's why day 6 in the feasts is dealing with atonement. That is the covering. God having to sacrifice through blood. And first he did it through blood of bulls and goats and sheep, until finally he had to come down himself, wrap himself in flesh, go to the cross for us, offer himself up as a high priest and as the lamb, and to receive the same thing all at the same time, so that that blood would cover both directions, before Christ and after Christ. That's the atonement. He had to atone for the sins of man. And the 6th feast is atonement. So day 6 is atonement. The feast is atonement. And this whole book that we've been reading, this Bible, the majority of it is about day 6. You get a little bit about the other days. And you get a little bit about day 7, which is coming. But the majority of the Bible is about the generation of Adam. That's what it says in Genesis 5. It says this is the book of the generation of Adam. So everything that you're seeing in the Bible is for us. And not only that, but he can't put everything in the Bible that's going on. Do you see in the Bible where it talks about Confucius? And yet that was going on during the times of things going on in the Bible. Do you see a whole lot heard about these different other countries? You don't hear anything except what deals with Israel in the Old Testament. And yet there's tons of other stuff going on. In, I think it's Rome, they had something between Cleopatra and Mark Antony. That ain't in there. But it was going on. He can't afford to put everything in there. But he's only putting things in there that are dealing with this generation of Adam. The things that are going to affect us. The things that we need to know about. So, day 6 is about the atonement. And it's about God having to cover through blood. Day 7. Oh, and here's something else. This is a nice little thing. Everybody go to Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. This is another little thing. It's a little nugget. That's pretty good. When you have verse 26. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. This is good. It says, and God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Who's God talking to? But he says, let us. He is Christ.
But he hasn't made him in the flesh yet. Well, he has, but we haven't seen.
Think about this. It says, let us make man in our image after our likeness. So it's not the same. It's different. It's not Christ because he's not made after the image of God. He is God. So the question is, who is in the image and the likeness of God? He was not like God. That's why he got booted. He tried to be like God. Remember in the beginning when we talked about that timeline? Remember the timeline? That little line? And we said God is where? Everywhere around it, right? And he can speak of the past as though it's already happened. And he can speak about the future as though it's already happened. So it says that we were created after the image of God. Man was. But there's only one man that's in the likeness, and that's the church. It says, we shall be like him. Beloved, we are now the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be, but we know that when he shall appear, we shall be what? Like him. So we will be in his likeness at his appearing. So when he says, watch this now. When we're going to make man, we're going to make him after our image and after our likeness. He's talking to the church. That's in the future, and he's talking to them like way back here in the past. That's what it is. So when he says us, a lot of people get confused and they automatically say, oh, well, then that must mean that there's more than one God. There must be a Trinity. No. When he says that we're going to make him after our image, he says that that's the way he made man, after his image. And he created him in his likeness. That's the church. That's us. First John, chapter 3, verse 2. First John. chapter 3, verse 2. Beloved, now are we the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be, but we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. I think the crazy thing is going to be when we take and we're in heaven with God, and he says, you know, let's make man after our image. And we say, yeah, I think that would be a good idea. Because that's going to be us in the future. He's talking to the church about something that's way back in the past. Oh, God. Still listening?
Okay, just one more time. Okay. He's talking to us.
He's talking to us.
About us.
About us.
But it's the us that hasn't become us yet.
It's the church, the bride.
Okay.
Perfect
I'm just trying to
Yeah,
keep up.
we here.
Trying to keep up with
This is us right here. And it
This
says,
is good, by the way. I'm just trying to keep up.
beloved, think about it now. Now we are the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be. But we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him.
That's good.
We're going to be in his likeness. So then that's when we're way over here. And now Christ is saying, I think we ought to make the church and the man. We're going to make man here. What do you think, church? And he says, yeah, I think we ought to. Even though we're still right here. We're the only thing that's made in his likeness and his image. The only thing. Angels are not made in God's likeness and image. That's what Satan is. Satan's just an angel. He was a high-ranking angel. High-ranking angel.
He was a worship leader.
Yes, he was. He was a worship leader. My mom would say he started smelling this stuff.
He's controlling that music.
That's old school. You thinking you're more than you are. So day 7. We haven't done day 7 yet. Let me do day 7 real quick. Day 7 is in Leviticus chapter 23. And we're going to start, let me start at verse 39. Leviticus chapter 23, verse 39. This is the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles. Either one. It says, also in the 15th day of the 7th month, when ye have gathered in the fruit of the land, ye shall keep a feast of the Lord 7 days. On the first day shall ye, and it goes through and says all these, but we're going to skip down to verse 41. And ye shall keep it as a feast unto the Lord 7 days in a year. It shall be a statute forever. In your generations ye shall celebrate it in the 7th month. Verse 42 is important. Ye shall dwell in booths 7 days. And all Israel born shall dwell in booths, that your generations may know that I made the children of Israel to dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. And Moses declared it, blah, blah, blah. Booths. When they came into Jerusalem, there were so many of them. And so they made these makeshift temporary places to stay. And they called them booths. Temporary. Kind of like a tabernacle. The tabernacle was a temporary dwelling for God until the temple was built. So this was their temporary place to stay. But they were to stay in that place for 7 days and chill. Just relax. That's all you're supposed to do for 7 days. It was a time of rest. What are we going to talk about in Genesis then? Chapter 2. It says in verse 2, and the 7th day God ended his work which he had made, and he rested. on the seventh day of all of his work. Is God resting right now? No. He's not resting because he's still working. That's why it's not day 7 yet. He's still working. He's still saving. He's still healing. He's still delivering. He's still working. So we're still in day 6. He's still working. There's another one in Revelation chapter 22 and 3. It says, and this is Revelation 22 and 3, and there shall be no more curse, but the throne of God and the Lamb shall be in it, and his servants shall serve him. He is doing things for us, and then we will do things for him. He'll be able to chill for 7,000 years. Seems like a long time, don't it? To chill. I'm just going to chill for 7,000 years. But that's what it is. He says, now remember, the tabernacle or the Feast of Booths of Tabernacle, you were supposed to chill for 7 days. That would be 7 periods. In this case, on day 7, he will chill for 7 periods, which is 1,000 years. 7,000 years. God is going to be able to rest. Finally. And sometimes you think, oh man, he's finally getting to rest after all this. Well, keep in mind, before time existed was eternity. And after time exists is eternity. We don't know what he was doing before time. He might have been chilling there. It's hard for me to wrap my mind around something that always existed because we as humans always compare things. I got to figure out what can I equate it to. Something. So in this case, since we're talking about eternity, it's like, well, man, that's just a drop in a bucket. No. Once you fill a bucket up, it's still going. You can't look at it that way. Well, it's just a small neutron in universe. No, that's still measurable. When you're talking about eternity, there's no measurement. We can't measure it. So it just kind of messes us up. Because we always try to compare it to something. Some way, how can we compare it? When you deal with things that are dealing with God, sometimes there's no comparison. He does his best to put things on the earth to help us to get comparisons with different things. When he starts talking about heaven and he says it's like this. This is going to be like this. So when he says this foundation is going to be like emerald, it's like I can't really give you the foundation stuff because it's just too much. Y'all can't have that yet. But I'm going to put something down here that's kind of like it. So that way you can have a comparison. And everything that he compares it to is stuff that we here on the earth find valuable. Everything. Even when he says he's going to go from earth to heaven and back. The only way you can compare that is speed. And when you think of speed, you think of birds. And how fast they are. And they put wings on things. Have you noticed anything in the Bible that's got wings? Angels. And it's trying to show you speed. It's like, and then it'll put wings on it. There's even something in the Old Testament where it's talking about Alexander the Great, and it shows him as a leopard with 4 wings. A leopard's already fast enough, but then you throw 4 wings on it, and it speaks about how quickly he conquered. He conquered with speed. So there's things that God tries to put on the earth. It's like, okay, I'm going to put this here so that you at least be able to kind of get an idea what I'm talking about, but you're really not going to get an idea until you get over here. Then you're going to understand it, because then you'll be like me. But until then, I got to give you just like little tidbits of different things so that you'll understand. Other than that, you'll never get it. It's too far past you. I just give you one little thing called eternity, and you can't deal with that. It's hard for you to even figure out that one thing. It's even harder for you to figure out how can I be here in the beginning, here in the end, and in the middle, all at the same time. And I was there, and I'm also there. And I'm there, and I'm there. And people say, wait a minute, how in the world do you do all of that? God. That's how. It's like air. It's all over the place. But even air is captured inside of this earth's dome that we've had. This atmosphere is holding the air in. But God's even past that. He's everywhere. And He's everywhere now. He's everywhere then. And He's going to be everywhere all at the same time. And so when you look at the way He's taken, and we went from Genesis 1:1 all the way to Revelation 22:3, and we were bouncing all over the Bible, but it all did just like this. Through 40 different men, 2,000 years of writing at different times, but they all had the same author. Because they have all the same author, He knows what He wrote. He knows what He's going to write, because He already wrote it before they got it. He wrote it before the foundation of the world. He already knew what He's going to write. And so He wrote little bits and pieces of stuff to hide it from people, but reveal it to His children of light. That's us. And so that's why things are revealed to us sometimes, and other people, they just don't get it. They think y'all nuts. They think you're crazy. Because they don't get it. Children of the darkness, they don't get it. But we get it. That's why I kind of like it. Amen. That's it. So,